One of football's biggest stars, Egyptian forward and Liverpool's top goalscorer, Mohamad Salah, has now become the darling of Chechnya. Salah is in Grozny for the World Cup and was woken from his bed so that he could be paraded down the pitch alongside Chechen leader Ramzan Kadyrov. The problem is, Kadyrov is an accused war criminal, and Salah seemed unaware of the possibility that he was being used for political purposes. Salah smiled for the cameras, while Kadyrov gushed that Salah was the best striker in the world. Well, before we get ahead of ourselves, why is this a big deal? Well, to unpack the controversy, let's speak to Rachel Denber from New York. She's a deputy director at Human Rights Watch. And in Washington, D.C., we have Christian Carroll. He's a Chechnya specialist and opinion editor with The Washington Post. Great to have both of you on the program. Rachel, let me start with you. Why is Ramzan Kadyrov a controversial figure when it comes to the human rights of his people?
Ramzan Kadyrov is a controversial figure because he has been running Chechnya like his own personal fiefdom for the past 10 years, is responsible for a massive crackdown on human rights and for crushing of all dissent, and has turned Chechnya basically into an enclave of fear by crushing dissent, by intimidating forcefully and brutally people who disagree with him, publicly criticize him, by presiding over security forces that torture people, that carry out enforced disappearances, and by arresting human rights defenders on completely bogus grounds, and also by last year presiding over a brutal anti-gay purge in Chechnya.
Right. So
he's quite controversial.
Right. So Christian Carroll, given the international platform now and the opportunity, for example, to take someone like Mohamad Salah and parade him around, is this what Kadyrov does? Is he going to milk the attention and use it as a PR campaign?
Well, that, I think, is exactly what he's trying to do. Kadyrov has been very skillful at leveraging his position to get money from Moscow and increase his own influence inside Russia. And another thing that he's been doing is cultivating his image as a Muslim leader by, for example, staging huge rallies in the Chechen capital in favor of persecuted Muslims in Myanmar, Burma. So the idea of taking Mo Salah, who is this tremendous hero in the Islamic world, and parading him around in Grozny is a great way of bolstering Kadyrov's credentials on that front.
Right. Rachel, how do you feel about him parading Salah around?
Well, it was 100% predictable. As soon as we found out that that Chechnya was going to that Grozny was included in the list of cities to host teams, we pointed this out to FIFA. We pointed it out that this is a huge problem, that Egypt had chosen Grozny as their host team city, and we said exactly that Kadyrov was going to take advantage of this to bolster his image. I think it's horrible that and wrong that Kadyrov would choose to do that. But he had, once you basically award Grozny with this privilege of hosting a World Cup finalist without connecting that to certain conditions, this is pretty much a predictable result.
Mm-hmm. Christian, how much of this reflects badly on Putin, or does he care at all? Because given Chechnya's relative autonomy, is he really bothered about any bad press that might come out of this?
Well, I think that Putin sometimes regards Kadyrov as a bit of a nuisance, but they struck a deal over the years, which is basically that, as Rachel said so well, Kadyrov gets his fiefdom. He can do whatever he wants there as long as he preserves the peace and maintains some kind of stability. It's a very unstable and treacherous peace, I might add. But as long as Kadyrov keeps a tight lid on things in Chechnya, Putin is content to give him a lot of latitude to do what he wants. And Kadyrov uses that latitude, as we've seen on this occasion, quite happily.
Yeah, Christian, you know the place better than most. Is it in any way, shape, or form a free society within Chechnya?
Well, I'd put it this way. First of all, it's a very, very traditional society. People are very attached to their traditions, to their families, to their clan connections. And Kadyrov is really built on some of these traditions to create a kind of all-encompassing dictatorship. I think Rachel described it very well. It is certainly not a free place today in any sense of the word. And I think one of the most fascinating things about it is the way that he's used his position to, for example, establish a very male-dominated system, again, drawing on certain Chechen traditions,
right.
but he has stated very directly that, women are supposed to be subordinate and shouldn't speak too loudly. And that kind of gives you an idea of the sort of regime that he's running.
Yeah, a lot of macho symbolism as well, having a look at his Instagram and things like that. Rachel, before I broaden this out and bring in a handful of other guests and talk more about the World Cup, I wonder what this Salah incident, this Salah and Kadyrov incident, tells you about what's to come in the month ahead. Is this a harbinger of controversial and unique and only in Russia moments that we're going to see over the next month?
Well, first, I think I think any country that's hosting a World Cup is going to use the World Cup in order to project an image of itself, right? So there's nothing unusual in that regard. But I think because Russia is going to be trying to project an image of itself, I think it's up to everyone to take a very close look at just what's beyond all the beauty that obviously is in Russia. What's beyond. What's beneath the surface, and to look at the human rights situation. And looking at Chechnya in particular, there's one thing I think that people really should look at, and that's that there is a major human rights activist that Kadyrov locked away in January on completely bogus marijuana charges. He should be freed. We've called on FIFA, which has a human rights policy now for all places where FIFA has operations, and that includes Chechnya now. We've called on FIFA repeatedly to urge Putin directly to have this human rights activist, and his name is Ayub Titiev, to have him freed. So I think that as long as the Egyptian team continues to train in Grozny, I think Kadyrov's probably going to look for more opportunities to boost his image. Absolutely. That's what we predicted.
Okay, Rachel and Christian, it's been a pleasure having both of you on the Newsmakers. I thank you very much for joining us. Let's focus now on how all of this is impacting the World Cup as a whole. Joining me now from London is Russia expert Anna Matveeva. She's a research conflict prevention a specialist in the Caucasus at King's College London. Also in London is Elliot Ross. He's a commentator who runs the Twitter account Football is a Country. And in Knutsford in the UK is John Bradley. He's a Russian football expert. Good to have all of you on the program. Elliot, let me start with you. I want to talk about Salah a bit more for the first couple of minutes. Was he put in an impossible situation with Kadyrov, or should he have known better?
It sounded like he was put in a pretty difficult position. The reports that I read said that he actually wasn't training in the stadium, and that Kadyrov or Kadyrov's people sent a car and woke him up from a nice nap that he was having. He's probably still recovering from getting barged over by Sergio Ramos in the Champions League final. Salah is a smart guy and a politically aware person, but it's difficult to know what his take is on that specific situation. He hasn't said anything publicly to my knowledge.
Right. Anna Matveeva, Salah is a symbol of unity, a positive image of Muslims, Arabs, Egyptians. You only had to see all the anger towards Sergio Ramos after he injured him in the Champions League final to know that this man was loved by many portions of society, right? Was it deliberate and brilliant from Kadyrov to go and grab this man from his, hotel bed and parade him around Grozny?
But absolutely, because Kadyrov also is trying to promote the same image himself, that you can be all things. You can have Islamic way of life, but you can have also good time. You can be a hero, but you can be also merciful to your enemies. You can be a strong man, but you can be generous. So that has been something which created quite a lot of calling for Kadyrov within Chechnya, within other Muslim men in Russia, and increasingly he is reaching out to these constituencies around the world. So in that way, Salah fits into this picture very nicely. This is not the first time when Kadyrov used celebrities to boost his image quite successfully. Gerard Depardieu, which does not fit into kind of cool footballer image, has been there, but it does work. And the fact that Kadyrov is being criticized by human rights group, by what is seen as Western liberals, actually increases his popularity.
That's interesting.
He can say, yeah, they criticize me because I matter.
Yeah, that's a good point, you know, and sometimes we need to get out of our echo chamber to realize that perhaps this has given him more support over there. John Bradley, fundamentally, people are asking the question, given what happened with Salah and Kadyrov, given the controversy with regards Russia in general, I wonder, is it fair to say that during this World Cup, Russia is going to use the beautiful game and some of the beautiful proponents of the game for propaganda purposes?
I think with Kadyrov particularly, he's always liked to align himself to celebrities. He's paid fortunes to footballers down the years to get them over to Grozny to play in Legends matches that he could play in himself. He's met with celebrities, he's met with boxers, he's paid fortunes to get people to the country. And I think maybe you give him a little too much credit in terms of he's using it for his own propaganda status. I think he's just a bit of a fanboy, and he likes to mix with these type of people, and he's got the money to do so, and he pays them to go over just to hang out with him. And I think that that's what he likes to do when he goes around dressed in his tracksuit. I think that in terms of the World Cup as a whole, I think that obviously it's going to be under the microscope, and people are going to be closely looking at the behaviour of the supporters in terms of hooliganism and racism and homophobia as well. But I think that, you know, those have all been dealt with quite specifically by the leaders in Russia in the build-up to the tournament. And I think also we're going to have a very different type of audience watching the games that we would have normally watching Russian football matches.
Okay, let me ask you, Elliot, then let's have a little pivot towards racism, and we fold a lot of this stuff in. I remember reading what Danny Rose had to say, the England left back, saying that he told his family, he's black, he told his family not to travel to Russia during the World Cup just in case he suffers from racial abuse, just in case they suffer from racial abuse in the stands. Racism is an issue. There has been a history of racism within Russian football. Black players for foreign teams have faced racism. Is this going to be a World Cup where many unpalatable things are kind of brushed under the carpet, Elliot, because everybody needs to have a good time and it's the beautiful game and let's just have fun?
Well, I think to an extent that depends on how the media companies covering the tournament choose to cover these issues. If there are racist chants going on, then you can make an issue of it, and you can discuss the context for it and the different ways in which the authorities are responding, the players who are caught up in it, what are they doing? Or if you want to not do that, which has more typically been the case with the coverage of European football, and often with English clubs, they've been experiencing racism when their teams have been playing away in Russia, then you can do that too. But I think I'd like to see a bit more onus put on if there is racism in the stadiums from the fans towards players of colour. I'd like to see a response from white players in particular. In cases such as Mario Balotelli, who's not actually at the World Cup this time, but he's faced a lot of abuse in the past and has walked off. And now I think the conversation is moving more and more towards, well, is a walk-off the right response? And I think that that it might well be, and that the wrong thing in that situation is to focus too much on the response of black players, players of colour. It's time for the white teammates to step up and make a stand against racism in the stadium and outside.
Yeah, Anna Matveeva, as we talk about these things, are we a part of the problem? Are we holding Russia to higher standards than we do other nations when they host tournaments?
To a certain extent, yes, because if we remember the negative publicity in the run-up to the Olympic Games, again, yeah, that was, 2014, that was before Ukraine, Crimea, Syria, all this crisis. Again, there was a lot of negative publicity about Olympic Games. The Russians are not going to do it right. It will be pretty horrible. There will be empty seats. What about gay rights? What about human rights? So, in general, it gave Russian people a sense, however hard we try, however we want to be welcoming hosts. Of course, there will be some kind of blunders, but generally we mean well, but we still would be seen as something kind of in a negative light. And that has been the atmosphere kind of in the run-up to the World Cup.
Yeah, so John Bradley, as we see this kind of cocktail of sports and politics come together, it's quite impossible to divorce sports and politics. Are we going to see the culture wars play out over the next month? within Russia, because all of these things, whether it's Kadyrov in Chechnya and the Caucasus, or it's homophobia, or it's racism and so forth, all happening against the backdrop of the beautiful game. Are we going to see all sorts of things unfold?
I think that, obviously the narrative has been painted by certain medias that it will happen, it's guaranteed to happen. We saw the problems in Euro 2016, particularly in Marseille, between England and Russia fans. And I know that action has been taken against those supporters who did portray that violence in France a couple of years ago, and they've been warned ahead of this tournament as well. So I think that, this is a serious situation, that there are fans groups in Russia, CSKA against racism in particular, have been trying to take a really big stance against racism within the country and try to add some diversity and inclusivity to the game as well. There is the outlying fear, but I think that you're guaranteed that if there is an instance or any incident of racism with any stadium, that it will be immediately highlighted by the world media, because Russia is under such a microscope holding this tournament. And I think that without a shadow of a doubt, the Russian authorities know that and will be very quick to try and stamp out any problems they have whatsoever.
Right, they have an anti-discrimination inspector, the Russian Football Union, and that's Alexei Smertin. A lot of us would remember him as a pretty decent player in the past. He said, Elliot, it's a chance for Russia to show how open it is. And he said, quote, sometimes a small group of people do stupid things. We need to punish people if they do something wrong. Does that come across as sincere to you, Elliot? And do you want to, give the man a chance?
Well, Smertin has not been particularly convincing on these issues before, so I wouldn't have a great deal of confidence in him to fulfill his role. And absent that, absent policing from the Russian authorities, unfortunately, the players will be quite vulnerable potentially at the World Cup.
Why do you think they'll be vulnerable?
Well, if past experience is anything to go by, crowds in Russia, football crowds in Russia, including at age group levels in international football, have often racially abused players during matches.
Right. Anna?
And it's difficult to see exactly.
Right.
I understand that the hooliganism question has been addressed.
Right.
That to me seems like a slightly different question.
Okay, so Anna, Elliot's saying absent kind of direct policing and almost a kind of, paternalistic view on top of the Russian authorities to ensure that this doesn't happen, you're going to see players being vulnerable to racism. What do you think, Anna?
What I think that there has been a friendly between Russia and France in April, and that kind of ugly behavior did show its head. But punishments were quite real after that. People have been detained. People have been subjected to all sorts of fines, punishment, warnings. They are known who they are. Russian politicians, the Russian Minister of Sports went on record saying that we are not going to tolerate that behavior. Of course, they cannot answer for every single individual, but the message from the state, and Russia is a strong state, is that this is really not on. The other thing is that football tickets for World Cup are actually quite expensive. So we are going perhaps to look at slightly different crowd, more kind of sponsorship, more middle class, probably a bit older groups, more middle class people. So we are not in the same kind of social milieu where this kind of behavior is the order of the day. So I would be perhaps more optimistic than Elliot.
Okay, so Elliot, you're not going to get the types who are, I guess, the CSKA fans racially abusing, foreign black players. It might be a little bit different. They might be slightly more educated, if I understand Anna better. Does that give you cause for optimism?
It's just very difficult to predict how it will play out. I would caution against, though, conflating the idea that the problem of racism with the problem of social class, in the issue of social class in the stadium. The idea being that you can somehow kind of price out racism by having such high ticket prices. I think, in fact, in general terms, you tend to see a better atmosphere, a more inclusive atmosphere when you have lower prices. But I can see that it's a tricky issue.
Let me bring in John Bradley. John, very finally, Are we going to have a good World Cup?
Yeah. I think in terms of the crowds that we're going to see more families. We are going to see more inclusivity within the stadiums. It is going to be a different type of audience than you will see in your standard Russian Premier League game or at a UEFA Champions League game, quite simply because we're not going to have quite the same tribalism that we have, where those supporters and ultras who follow Zenit, CSKA or Spartak or any of those teams that play regularly in European football, it's going to be a different type of crowd that we see at the World Cup. We see it at every tournament that we go to. And I think that will prevent any major problems we have. Of course, we did see that game in St. Petersburg where Russia did take on France. It's a game that I was covering as well. And it was a small number, but it is still too many, no matter how many there are, as a small number. But, you know, in terms of what we're going to see for the World Cup matches, perhaps maybe at the Russia games there will be more and more tribal atmosphere. But I think certainly the supporters in Russia are much keener and more excited to see the world stars that we're going to see over the next few weeks than see their own team.
Okay. Well, we're all looking forward to the World Cup. We hope it's not ugly. We hope it's fantastic. Anna Matveeva, Elliot Ross and John Bradley, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.